We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we'll be looking at all the angles on the Israeli conflict and even some of the latest legal news in our Talking Liberty segment. We'll be joined by defense and Pentagon expert, also a former Air Force pilot, Mr. Dave Patterson, and Liberty Nation staple, the legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. But first, we're talking with America's most syndicated columnist, prolific author whose latest book, A Watchman in the Night, is available just about everywhere, and well worth a read, I might add, Mr. Cal Thomas, who joins us now, and as ever will hopefully shed a little light on what is often a subject obscured by the fog of war. Hi, Cal. Thanks for being here today.
Delighted, Mark. Always a pleasure to be with you. A real thinker in the UK.
Thank you. I like to consider myself such. I'm not sure anybody else does, but I appreciate the kind words. Now, Cal, obviously the story for us to discuss today, it's Israel, the ongoing humanitarian crisis there, the war, the age-old arguments that are again being brought to the fore, which I think is something that people aren't really tuning in on. That they're making new arguments as though these are revelations, and that's not the case. It's the age-old arguments that have been used for the last 75 years. But Cal, can we start off? Can you give us your overall thoughts on what's happening? Just general thoughts.
Well, there are two narratives, Mark, and have been really since the reestablishment of Israel in the land of its ancestors in 1948. One is Israel, the Zionists, are an illegal occupier of Palestinian land. They threw Palestinians out of their homes, and most are now refugees and demand to be returned, or at least compensated. The other is that the Jews have had a presence in the land for nearly 4,000 years. They came back in 1948 following the Holocaust to their ancient homeland, and they deserve to have it there. Now, there's a lot of anti-Semitism rolled up in this. There is, a continuation of, according to some of the mullahs in Iran and elsewhere, of Hitler's final solution. They believe that their God, they call Allah, wants them to kill Jews, eradicate Israel, then come after what they call the cross worshippers, that would be the Christians, even moderate Muslims, and certainly unbelievers or other infidels, as they call them. So if you understand those two narratives, then you understand that's everything that's happening. And every event that happens there is plugged into one of those two narratives. We saw that with the Gaza hospital alleged bombing, the first word out from Hamas. And believe me, they have all this structure. This play has been written in advance. First word is those evil Israelis bombed the hospital, killed 500 people, including a lot of children. That went around the world. Demonstrations ensued. But then,
if I may add, Cal, that was also the first line from the New York Times.
Yes, of course. Well, they're in league with everything on MSNBC. But as soon as the truth came out, which, by the way, was broadcast first by Al Jazeera, not exactly a Zionist entity, and showed that in fact, it was not an Israeli missile, but a misfired missile from Islamic Jihad, another terrorist group, that didn't do anything to the demonstrations around the world and to much of the press coverage because they hate Israel. So that's all you need to know, and that's it.
Well, it very much is a case of that. There's two perspectives, and everybody's being asked, or in fact forced in many ways, to pick a side on that. And I think what we've seen, as you say, around the world with all these embassies being attacked, days of rage, days of jihad that have been called for. I think we're seeing that people have picked a side, and that there's a lot of ugliness just buried beneath a very thin veneer of civility and allegedly shared values that we all thought prior to October 7th that we all had. And that appears not to be the case anymore, does it?
No. And then the other big mistake, and you saw this in President Biden's interview on 60 Minutes, and he has reiterated it in the past, and so did Obama before him, and Bill Clinton, and even Republicans, that what is needed is a Palestinian state. Well, I wrote in one of my columns this week, if you want to know what a Palestinian state would look like, look at Gaza. I was opposed to the unilateral withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza because it created a vacuum, and the vacuum was filled by Hamas. And Hamas is a terrorist organization supported by Iran, and they were expected to, and in fact did follow through by launching attacks on Israeli civilians, babies, elderly people, disabled people, women and children. It was as predictable as the sun rising in the morning, Mark. And this particular incident in early October was a massive intelligence failure. When some kind of stability is restored here, and hopefully Hamas is defeated, there's going to be a major investigation of this. The head of Shin Bet has already acknowledged that he failed. Bibi Netanyahu hadn't said anything about it yet. U.S. intelligence gave no information about this. How do you plan such a massive operation with all the technical spy equipment available today and paying off possible, people to tell what's going on? How does that all happen, and all the tunnels and everything else, without anybody knowing about it? That's going to be one of the big questions in an investigation.
Yeah, I think the idea that it was just a spur of the moment attack because Hamas had a bunch of rockets lying around, I think that's a foolish way to look at it, because you had air, land, sea, and a cyber attack that took place, I believe, denial of service attacks. So essentially, I don't think people really realize that with the denial of service attack, that meant that things also couldn't get out of Israel. So whatever Israel was trying to tell the world about what was happening, they couldn't, not to the degree they wanted to. And so that allowed Hamas and Hamas's backers, Iran, for example, to kind of craft a narrative about what's happening across social media before Israel could put out what's happening to them. And that's planning. So let's talk about Iran for a moment.
Let me add one other quick thing here, Mark. I think it follows up on what you were saying. Look how fast the reporting has shifted. For the first few days, it was all about the horror that was perpetrated on Israel and the innocent people who died and the people who were kidnapped and are being hostage. And then I knew it was coming. The narrative began to shift fairly slowly at first, but now more rapidly. Look at the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Look at those evil Israelis cutting off electricity and water. Look at them bombing seemingly indiscriminately, when it's not. They know where the targets are, of Gaza. And look at all the damage and destruction, and children are being killed. So we're hearing less and less and less on what precipitated all of this, which is an invasion by these terrorists, these Hamas terrorists, into Israel and killing a lot of people and seizing a lot of people, and some of those killed are Americans. So I think we have to keep that in mind, and the media, of course, is playing its usual role in this.
Very, very much so. I believe it's at least 30 Americans have been known to be being killed in this so far at time of recording. So with Iran, Iran has hostility. I think that's the lightest way to say it towards Israel.
Yes.
But they are also, as we well know, as everybody knows, as the Biden administration knows, they're the world's biggest sponsor, largest sponsor of international terrorism. That includes Hamas and Hezbollah, which has begun attacking from the north there. Now, the Biden administration to date has been very reluctant to say that that Iran has a connection here. But surely, to get back to your point about there was an intelligence failure, all the intelligence that needed to be gathered to orchestrate that kind of multivariate, multi-pronged attack had to have come from Iran, right? It couldn't have come from Hamas. Hamas are essentially animals.
Right. Well, the other thing, Mark, what the administration is trying to do is save this Iran nuclear deal. They still think it's possible. They think it's possible to make a deal with people who say that they want to wipe out the United States, wipe out Israel. We're the great Satan. Israel's the little Satan. They have a direct order from their God to do this, so it's righteous, and they will get virgins in heaven for doing so. How do you counter that? You can only counter it by force. You can't sit down at a negotiating table with people who want you dead and feel they have a mandate from their God to carry out your murder and say, well, let's see. All right, we'll agree. Instead of murdering you by a bomb, we'll murder you by bullets. How's that? That is your compromise position. We are in complete denial about this. Letting Iran have a nuclear bomb will ensure that they will use it first on Israel and possibly here. North Korea, for example, has already said they've got ICBMs that can reach Los Angeles, the west coast of America. We need to send a clear message to Iran. If you get the bomb, and especially if you use the bomb, your entire country will be turned into sand, and mean it. And it has to come like that. It has to be that strong. You will be completely annihilated. And, I would love to see regime change there, but we're not going to be able to do that. You saw what happened when they had the last election, which was fake, and people demonstrated. They either killed them or put them in prison. These people are pure evil, and evil cannot be accommodated. It must be rejected and destroyed.
On that note, we'll be back right after this short break with Cal Thomas. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.